Yes, indeed. Welcome back to the Patrick Coffin Show. This is the show where we go upstream from arguments about politicians and public institutions and 1970s game shows to the heart of the matter, the things that last, the formational sources of culture. And today, we have a really fascinating guest with a story that you don't hear a lot. Catholics particularly are used to hearing about stories from atheism or from Protestantism. Once in a while, there'll be a Muslim story come across the finish line, but it's rare to find a conversion story that combines all of them, from Muslim to atheist to evangelical, all the way to the bosom of the Catholic Church. There's a new book that tells the story. It's called From Islam to Christ, and its author joins us today. Her name is Derya Little. She has a PhD in politics from Durham University in England and a master's degree in history from Bilkent University in Turkey. Daria converted from Islam to the Catholic faith in her early 20s after a long, circuitous, painful route. It's just an amazing book to read. She's now in Pennsylvania with her husband and 3 children. The book is titled From Islam to Christ, One Woman's Path Through the Riddles of God. And Daria joins us now from her expanding tribal estate in Pennsylvania. Hey, Daria, thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Just want to flash the book title here for the potential readers. There'll be show notes at patrickcoffin.media. I know so many of the people who've crossed your path, Daria. It was odd reading it. I felt like I was, someone in the peanut gallery who never actually knew you, but we've got a bunch of almost overlapping orbits, from Mark Shea's book, By What Authority, to Al Kresta, who's one of my mentors in radio. So what induced you to write the whole, before we get into the parts, what about the whole? What induced you to put it all down between 2 covers?
The combination of my husband and Al Kresta. My husband always told me, you have such a unique story, you need to share, but you don't think your story is that much different. And I was listening to a podcast by Al Kresta, and he talked about everybody having something to share with the church. Yep. And I had this picture of like everybody else and me sitting on this like box of treasure and not sharing. Mm-hmm. And I thought that was my story, my conversion story. And in the end, it's God's story, so I can't just hold on to it. And that's when I started writing.
It's not easy to read in the first part. I would say the first quarter of the book. It was very readable, and you're a very engaging storyteller. But there's so much sadness in the early days of growing up in Turkey. So let me start with Turkey. I know this is an exaggeration, but in my mind, as a Canadian living in America and a student of history and know somewhat about Islam, it seems like there's 4 groups. There's Sunni, there's Shia, there's Wahhabi, and then there's Turkish Muslim Islam. It sounds to me from reading your story, Daria, that in Turkey you can't be too Muslim, but you can't be too little Muslim either. It sounds like a unique experience.
Well, it's part of our imperial heritage in a way. Once the Ottoman Empire ended, even though Turkey technically broke off as a nation state, we were still the heirs. We have that imperial pride. It's like, we ruled all those Arabs and all those Muslims you speak of for years. So we are this pride and being victorious is instilled in us, and being Muslim is a big part of it. And when the new nation state and new Turkish identity was forged, Islam became an inherent part of being Turkish. But Atatürk, the founder of modern Turkey, he didn't want us to turn to east, but to west. So he imposed all these different reforms, and Islam was a part of it, because I don't think he himself was a believer of Islam, but he knew that you can't just get rid of somebody's religion by military force, although communists might disagree with that. But he used it to tie the society together, but he told basically you can be this much Muslim, but not too much. Yeah. So he suppressed many religious uprisings and such, but you can't be anything else either. I had just a few atheist friends growing up. I didn't meet a Christian until I was 19, so it worked. His strategies work definitely.
Is there some analogy to the role of Ataturk in the forming of modern Turkey and the Shah forming modern Iran. Kind of secular, but definitely Muslim in character and tone.
Yes, yes, definitely. And that's one of the reasons Turkey always was afraid that what happened to Shah would happen in Turkey. And Turkish military always suppressed all kinds of communist tendencies and also those groups who wanted the Sharia law. I don't know if you're familiar with the current Turkish government, but the first thing the current president did was to get rid of all those elements in the military so he can reign free. But yes, it was very similar to Shah.
Which elements did Erdogan purge? The radical Muslim?
Secular, all the people, we call them Kemalists, like people who follow Atatürk's reforms.
Yeah.
So, and he decimated the military, basically, because they have been the ones who held the secular system together.
Yeah.
Because always he wanted to move back to Islam, always. I mean, Islam is not only a, Friday religion. It's a social and political system as well.
Friday, that's the Muslim equivalent of Easter Christmas?
Yes.
That's funny. Is it a theocracy, technically?
Yes, definitely. There is no distinction between religious and political. And it's also Muhammad himself established as a political system, a state. If you read the Muslim history, you can see that. Yes, definitely a theocracy.
And your parents were nominal Muslims, and their unhappy marriage eventually ended. A lot of people undervalue or underestimate the impact that the end of an even unhappy marriage has on a child. How did your parents' divorce affect you and your worldview about the Muslim presuppositions that surrounded you with?
I think, as every child does, the world revolved around me, and when they divorced, that was a big shake-up for me. Even though they never had a happy marriage, I talk about it in the book, but still they were together, and we were just like everybody else. But when they divorced, I realized they lied to me about their love. We weren't enough. That's what I thought, that me and my brother, we weren't enough to hold them together. Or their love didn't mean anything. Because if he left us and didn't come back, what does that say about his love? And that really created a crisis of confidence and eventually faith for me, which led me to leaving Islam.
You also began to read the life of Muhammad and how he is the exemplar for at least a Muslim man, and you weren't impressed with his resume.
No, I wasn't. Well, the thing is, growing up, we hear about Muhammad's life, but he's always portrayed as this kamil insan, the ideal man, somebody we should all emulate as Muslims. But he's always portrayed as this victorious, but at the same time just and merciful character. We were taught that he never waged a war of aggression. And after my parents' divorce, for the first time, I wondered if they told me lies about my religion as well, because they lied to me about their love. So that's when I started questioning. And when you want to read about Islam with a critical eye, you better be prepared for what you find. Because questioning, doubt, critical thinking, any of those are big no-nos in Islam. But when I read Muhammad's life, especially his treatment of women, as a young girl myself, and the importance of violence in Islam, they made me realize I cannot follow this man.
How does the lack of God as Father in the Muslim world, how did that affect you, and leaving it to the Christian worldview of God, the creator of everything, and you and I being a father? That seems like a massive paradigm shift.
It is, and it is very hard to explain because I had no frame of reference as God being a father. I was never taught that. You can't even think that. It is unthinkable because that means you're trying to shrink an eternal being to your little human mind. And for a long time it was hard because the only father I ever knew, I didn't want to call God Father because in my own experience, fathers weren't very good things. It took a long time for me to change that perception. And it's like, no, my father should have been like God. He is not a role. And I think that's one of the problems in the West. People look at their own fathers and judge God through their own fathers. So, but it took a long time for me to pass that hurdle, definitely.
In your life, did you find that you fell into a pattern that many young people do, women in particular, of living in the long shadow of a father who left, looking for that father's love in the arms of boyfriends, wanting to get back that kind of father wound by trying to jumpstart another relationship? And of course, in your case, as in many cases, it doesn't work if it's not sacramental, if it's not tied to a life commitment.
Yes, definitely. I mean, it's interesting because you're looking for that love, but at the same time, you're holding something back because all the love you knew was flawed. So you know it's going to end, but you still look for it. So you're kind of in this in between place. That's why I always had boyfriends, but I never had a lasting relationship because as you say, without the sacrament, without true forgiveness, you just never let yourself completely go. So I think that's one of the reasons women who grew up with abusive fathers or without any father figure, they kind of jump from one relationship to another looking for something that's never there.
Mm-hmm. In your case, your atheism became kind of a hardened stance, didn't it? You weren't like, well, I'm a mushy agnostic. You figured the universe was godless, right? That was your working premise?
Yes, definitely. And if it wasn't proved by science, it did not have any room in my mind. I mean, part of it, I just wasn't aware of any reason or philosophy. And God of Islam, Allah, is not somebody rational or loving. So I figured even if there's God, he cannot be compatible with science. Yeah. I just did not have the concept.
You began to meet Christians along the way that little by little kind of chipped away at that worldview. It sounds from reading your book, From Islam to Christ, it was more their example than their battery of arguments.
Yes. I think, God knows us better than we know ourselves, and he finds us where we are in life. I mean, first, for me, I needed to hear those arguments, but also I had to see what difference it made in their lives because I was miserable. I tell people I was an honest atheist because I was unhappy because there is that hole in your heart that can never be fulfilled. But at the same time, I just never thought too much about it because when you think about, okay, we're all gonna die in 80 years the most, and that's that. It just makes you depressed and unhappy, and everything you do kind of becomes so shallow. And I was living such a life. I had no moral compass to speak of. And when I started meeting Christians, I really liked all the arguments and as you say, discussions. But then I saw something in their life that I didn't have, that joy of Christ. Something to look for in the afterlife, which I didn't have. It just looked supernatural, which was a problem for me because I did not believe in supernatural. Mm-hmm. So it was kind of side by side for me.
Yeah, like really nice, well-meaning people who believe in the tooth fairy. And how does that connect, right?
Yes, you guys should all be in an asylum, but no, you're not, and you're functioning perfectly in a society.
Yeah. You show signs of great sanity and normalcy, so something doesn't quite click there. One thing I noticed about all the people that you met on your journey, Daria, was that they were all happily married. This is a marital example story, isn't it?
Yes. And I think it's very important, especially even in the West now, because it just doesn't happen. And it never happened in my life either. Even people who stayed married, they weren't happy. And there was always this power struggle, and there were secrets, people went behind their backs. I mean, it just was never this happy marriage that they were partners. They truly cared and loved each other selflessly. It was always who's going to come first. And when I, for the first time, witnessed a true Christian marriage, honestly, I thought they were faking it. I thought they were
pasted on smile.
Yes, they were acting this way when I'm there, and as I leave, they are just, the exact same. But the more I spent time with them, the more selfless acts I saw. I was like, I think this is real. It's crazy, but it's real. And it was very important for me to see that such a love could exist.
Were most of them, if I'm remembering correctly, missionaries who were kind of doing it on the lowdown?
Yes, you kind of have to in Turkey.
So what would happen in Turkey, in a small town or Ankara or Istanbul, if you stood up on a soapbox with a bullhorn or a sign saying Jesus is Lord or what have you? What is that illegal? Do you get shut down? Do they take you away?
It's not technically illegal unless the people you preach to are under 18. That's illegal. But we have street evangelizers and such. I mean, they find a way to shut you down. There are all these legal loopholes they make you go through to get a permit to speak in public. Like if we had to hold Christmas celebrations, we had to apply for permission 6 months before because it would take forever. So it's that kind of persecution. And the people themselves could never get government jobs. Even I couldn't, even though, I mean, I was active in ministry, but I wasn't I didn't evangelize in the streets.
Yeah.
But I could never get a security clearance to work in the government. So it's kind of a soft persecution. I mean, people have been murdered, like a bishop and a priest were murdered since I became a believer, and 3 Protestants, their throats were cut. So it's like there's physical danger, but it's mostly soft persecution.
They just kill you with 10,000 bureaucratic paper cuts, right?
Yes, and you're, of course, socially unaccepted. Everybody sees you as a traitor. So there are a lot of different aspects to alienate people.
Are there nuns in habits and priests in Roman collars? Or is that rare and frowned upon and just don't do it because it's not going to lead to anything happy?
Part of it, religious attire have been forbidden. It's basically was directed to Muslim clerics, but of course it affected Christians too. I remember we had Franciscan nuns who worked at the Vatican embassy, but when they came to our church to visit us, they will just go out, get in a cab, drive to our church and get out. They weren't allowed to be seen in public in their habits.
Who did the throat cutting of the Protestants and the priests and bishops? Who were the radicals who were...
And this Muslim nationalists. I mean, it's like they were Muslim, but they were also nationalists. So it's not like ISIS, but they are kind of Turkish Muslim. And it took forever for them to get convicted, and there were lies. It's been such a messy thing because even the police and the judicial system, they are suspicious of the Christians. So they're like, they must have done something wrong, So it's been a really messy process.
Is this the image of Christian as bad? This sounds like the Hollywood version, but inverted, of the corrupt small town where, beneath suburban America there lurks this darkness, or the myth of it's sort of a stereotype, the big city cop with the heart of gold. How are Christians? How do they appear in Turkish films and TV shows? It sounds to me like the media has shaped the perceptions of Christians as against Turks in even the way they tell stories.
Yes, and I think part of it is the history, because then you can use Christians as this, evil outsiders who are pining to drive us apart and, conquer our lands. And so then you kind of take people's attention away from the real issues. So growing up and we watched movies and stuff, all the bad guys are Christians, especially Catholics, crusaders. They come to your town, they rape the women, and you see a guy with a cross tabard or wearing a cross. That is a bad guy. There is no way. And women are all loose. They're there to seduce the Turkish man. So it's like this history plus media. So all you hear is just bad things about Christianity, and also it confirms that yes, Christians corrupted Jesus's teachings. this is a proof that Islam is right and Allah was right to send Muhammad, because look at all these Christians in the West, they are so immoral and decadent. So, so it played in both ways.
There's a battle going on. It's not been settled by the magisterium, it seems to me. On the one hand, there are Catholics who say that the best way to interpret the Second Vatican Council and the Catechism is to say that Muslims believe in the same God as God the Father, but there's some adjustments. And there's the way it's phrased, there's a kind of an ambiguity. Versus, Allah is not the Christian God. Allah is either an illusion or a demon. Where do you stand on that?
You just want to get me in trouble with everybody else. Right. No, I think it's really dangerous to say Allah is the creator of universe. I don't want to say demon or Satan. I wasn't there. I don't know. I can't pass a judgment on it. But Allah's nature is not compatible with Christ. Okay, so Allah is somebody who can change his mind. So a sin in Islam, a sin is a sin because Allah says so. So he can change his mind tomorrow, or he can say, you know what, you guys all sinned, but I'm just going to forgive you today. You all come to heaven. So you can't force Allah to do something and anything. Or science, there's a reason that science and innovation haven't progressed in the East, because science is not compatible with Islam. So this is a completely nature being, but to need Christ, we need to have a consistent God who is rational, pure, and loving, and he cannot look upon our sin, right? So Christ is that bridge between the sinful man and a perfect God. But when Allah is not that perfect God, why do we need Christ? There is no need for Jesus. I'm not saying, that's one of the things. I'm not saying all Muslims are this way. I think it's written in our hearts to worship the true God. And I think in their naivete, most Muslims worship the true God. So I want to separate between the, truly worshiping Muslims from what Islam teaches. But when we say, well, Allah and God, creator of universe, they are the same, then I think all you're doing is creating confusion and really taking the only means to grace away from these people. So, so I don't think they are the same, but I know it's not a very popular belief.
Right. Well, what you just said coheres with what Pope Emeritus Benedict said in his Regensburg speech, that religion that is separated from the sources of rationality has a tendency to become violent because it's disconnected from reason. And I've interviewed Robert Riley, who has a book on this topic called The Closing of the Muslim Mind. And he points out that there are certain strains of Islam that are completely supportive of lying. You can lie to spread the message of Islam because Allah himself is not the source of truth. So there's a kind of almost a supernatural flip-flopping that's accepted, and therefore we can flip-flop in the way we live our lives. We can deceive or we can tell the truth at whim, at will. Does that make sense?
Yes, and also the ends justify the means. That's a big difference. As it doesn't, the ends don't justify the means in the Christian faith. But to achieve that goal, to achieve the bigger goal of making the world Muslim, or making Islam dominant, then you can do whatever you want, and hence all the violence, all the justification you can find with these, as you say, with a God who is not consistent, who is not rational, because you can appeal that side of him.
So back to you and your story on the ground there in Turkey. You have a boyfriend, then you have another boyfriend. You're trying to find that anchor, that you want to be happy, obviously. And you're very frank about the abortions that you had. You write it very clinically. It's almost like reading, Luke's account of the gospel. There's no extra adjectives put in there. Was your conscience bothering you a part of the thing that kept you going in your search for truth? Because I couldn't help but chuckle at your not once, not twice, but I think it was five attempts to connect with the French Jesuit. I think every Catholic can go, yeah, that's happened to me too. And that's the first thing that came out of your mouth, wasn't it? That was a really a dark thing in your heart that you needed relief and liberation from.
Yes, and I think even though I was an atheist, I knew it was wrong because, as I said, these laws are written in our heart. I kept justifying it. It's nothing, it's nothing. But especially as a woman, you cannot help but feel the change in your body. Even though mine were all like first trimester abortions, it was so like I was trying to silence this whisper in my heart with my with all my justifications, and I carried that for a long time. And it was the first, it was the thing that I went to the confession with, even after my baptism, because it's just still bothers your conscience because you have done something, such an evil thing, even though it's forgiven, it scars you. And I will carry that scar for the rest of my life. And until I met, until I joined the Catholic Church, went to confessional, I don't think I had truly forgiven myself. And that's when I started writing. I hadn't told anybody. Like, it was a big step for me to put it in the book because only precious few people knew about it. But putting in the book, I think it showed me that by that precious sacrament, I forgave myself.
Is that the big difference in your mind between your life as an evangelical Christian, in which you had Jesus Christ as Lord, you had prayer, you had community, you had the desire to share the faith, but you didn't have that sacramental certainty. You didn't hear the words, I absolve you. Has that made all the difference in the world? Yes,
and it does still too. I mean, in every Catholic who goes to confession, you dread going it. I mean, there must be something wrong with you if you really like going to confession, but that gives you a new, fresh start every time the priest says it. It's, Christ himself saying it. And I think it's because God knows us. We are spiritual and physical beings. We need to hear it. We need to touch, there's a reason he gave us the Eucharist, because then we can touch him. And he knows we have to do it weekly because, we will fall over and over again. And I think the Catholic Church gives us all these avenues to find grace and claim it over and over every week, every day, even if we want to.
How did that first conversation go with the priest? Were you nervous that he was going to, put one over on you and kind of, not force convert, but were you nervous that he was going to go into uncomfortable territory? And of course he didn't. Tell us about Father Patrice, the French Jesuit.
I talk about him a lot in my book, and I do miss him. He was in his 70s, and he was a missionary in Chad for a long time, but he just moved to Turkey. So he has really broken English, and I have broken French, he has really broken Turkish, a little bit of English, and he was French himself. And I had broken French, Turkish, and English. So it was like between the two of us, there was maybe one language that could communicate. But I was afraid to talk to him, partly because he was much older than me, and it's part of our culture. You just don't share personal stuff with people who are older than you. You listen to their wisdom and you just shut your mouth. Yeah. And I didn't know what to expect. But when I went to him, I think my intellect was already convinced about the truth of the Catholic Church, but my heart wasn't. And he just calmed me down. He gave me, I didn't know back then, but, he showed me a few ways of Ignatian spirituality to calm that storm in my spirit. And he was wonderful. And he never, forced me or, just they don't do that. But no, I didn't know what to expect. I mean, I kind of ended up knocking on the church's doors like, okay, somebody better listen to me because I can't find anybody to listen to me.
And then you discovered By What Authority by Mark Shea, because that book's been a help to a lot of people. He lays it out very simply that Protestants accept non-biblical traditions like monogamy, like abortion being always wrong, and of course the great tradition of the table of contents. How do we get this list together? So that sounds like that was a major part of your battle. Is who's the final authority? Where does this spiritual moral buck stop?
Yeah, it always bothered me after I became a Protestant. So Jesus knows us better than ourselves, but he just goes, leaving us like high and dry until we kind of compile some sort of book together. And that takes quite a while to put it together. It just didn't make sense that he will die for us, then leave us just to ourselves, because we are really inclined to kind of go off our different separate ways. I mean, even in the New Testament you read, they've already started to wander away. So it didn't make sense that he would he wouldn't leave us an authority. But I mean, in the Protestant churches, there's St. Paul, and then there's 1500 years, and then there's Luther. So there's all this huge gap, but I didn't know well enough to put that all together. Everything was so new to me. So everything that bothered me, like only scripture, only faith, and lack of a magisterium and such, I kind of pushed it away, and I said, I clearly don't know enough to make any judgments on these issues. But then a friend of mine became Catholic, and how could he? I was just so appalled, because remember, all the bad guys were Catholics. So he was becoming one of the bad guys. Mm-hmm. And I really wanted to prove him wrong, because clearly I have been right so many times in the past, So I set out to prove him wrong. And I was getting my master's. So I go to the library. So there's just one book on Catholic theology, Principles of the Catholic Faith, and by Ignatius Press again. And it's written by this guy called Cardinal Joseph Ratzinger. I mean, who is this person? I don't know. Mm-hmm. It's a Mike's book. I take it out and I just start, going through it. I had no idea what he was talking about. Like I had never anything from the Catholic perspective. So I put the book back. I didn't even know he was the Pope. I was that disconnected, had no idea. And when I went back to my room, I found this book that friend of mine who converted because of Mark Shay's book as well. He wrote, he says, so that you know that I haven't gone completely insane. So that's how I started reading about Catholicism. And Mark Shay was much easier to read than Cardinal Ratzinger, I must.
Cardinal Ratzinger's book, Introduction to Christianity, was very influential to me. But I probably got 20 or 30% of it the first time I read it through. I felt like I was someone sipping root beer my whole life. Now I'm introduced to Dom Perignon. Very, very dense, elegant, elevated. And that was one of his early books too, 1968, I think. And it should have an asterisk, introduction to Christianity. That's kind of advanced. Do you have contact with your family now? Yes.
Yes, actually, because of my conversion, my relationship with my family is much better, because I realized that I needed forgiveness, and so did they. And I finally made up with my father, whom we were estranged with for, I don't know, by then almost 10 years. So I do. It's very hard to talk about Christianity with them, because they know, but they really don't want to talk about it, because it's shameful and you just don't do it. And but our relationship is much better because of Christ. So they kind of turn a blind eye to it.
Have they read the book?
No, they don't speak English, but they have come to America to visit me and my family. So we've taken them to churches and stuff, but it's a little harder to share with one's family, as many people know. I hope to write it in Turkish, geared towards Turks in the future, but for now it's only in English.
Well, you've just taken my next question. What about the Turkish edition?
I would like, yeah, because this one is clearly geared towards America. Like, I don't have to talk about Turkey if I'm writing to the Turks. So I want to write it, and unfortunately my written in Turkish isn't that well, so I need to work on that as well. But it's one of my projects.
Your Turkish is rusty.
It is, because I never wrote any papers or any books, anything in Turkish. So I kind of don't speak either language perfectly.
Well, listen, why don't you give my listeners a treat? And do you know the Hail Mary in Turkish? Because it sounds it's not like German, it's not like Arabic, it's not like English, it's not like French. It's sui generis. How can you say the Hail Mary for us?
Yes. Okay. It's been a while, but I can say it, I think. Selam sana, Allah'ın en sevgili kulu Meryem, Rab seninledir. See, that's all I remember.
Well, that's enough of a taste. There's a kind of a almost an Aramaic lilt to it. It
Yes,
sounds lovely.
I think it's close to Aramaic in grammar structure too.
Mm-hmm. Now, eventually, your path to Rome went by way of Merry England and Durham. Your description of Durham really makes me want to go there and drink Canadian beer and have a cigar or something. Very kind of idyllic, like Christmas all year round. How did you end up at Durham, and what did you study there?
I wasn't expecting, but I received a scholarship from Durham University, and I think partly because they didn't have that many women studying there, so in my program. So I was about to get confirmed in Turkey, and then I learned that I was moving to England, and Father Patrice thought it would be better to be confirmed there into that community. So I was like, okay, so I went to England for my studies in 2007, and it was like I felt like I was moving to the world of Lord of the Rings. It's like that kind of gloomy, old but dignified, and deep rivers, and it's beautiful. Especially Durham Cathedral is just it's beautiful. I mean, and so that's where I ended up getting confirmed. Yeah, but yes, if you go to England, definitely go to Durham.
How far is Durham from London?
3 hours train ride.
Okay. Yeah, I just love that C.S. Lewis, Narnia-ish thing. Maybe because I'm Canadian, I miss the fog and melancholy music and that kind of thing. And then you hopped on the interwebs and you met someone through Catholic Match.
Yes. So I was in England. It's all great ales and crumpets and tea. It's beautiful. But then I realized that I was advancing in my age and
and wisdom.
Yeah, I wasn't that old. I was 29. I wasn't that old. But I also realized I really wanted to marry somebody who who took their faith as seriously as I was, because that was one lesson I learned from my fiance, whom I was engaged to. Because that's the most important thing in my life. How can I share my life with somebody who didn't think the same? So a few friends of mine had success through eHarmony. I think back then it was the Protestant equivalent of it. So they suggested, I'm like, okay, I'll give it a 3-month try, because I was really broke. That's the only money I had. And Virgil, my husband, was the first person I met, but he happened to be in America. And it's funny because one of the reasons I got my PhD in England, I didn't want to live in America. It felt like it was too far. And, God has a sense of humor. Mm-hmm. So we ended up getting married the year we met, and we ended up getting married in the church. Father Patrice preached, and he actually resided over our marriage too. So
beautiful. That's a great grace right there, isn't it? That's so many bows are put on that story at the same time. How long did you stay? Did you come to America right after you got married?
Yes. I was writing my dissertation, and I could write it here without any trouble. So yes, we moved here right after we got married.
I just read, I think it's called the British Values something. It's a poll that came out a few weeks ago indicating that I think 52% of people in the UK have no religion. Now, there's several different ways to interpret that. One is to get depressed. Oh my gosh, the sky's falling. Doom and gloom. My gosh, how did we get here? I look at it with great excitement, because everywhere you turn, there's someone who is made for eternity who doesn't know why they exist. So that's an ongoing evangelization opportunity. Having grown up in Turkey and then spent time in England in, I guess, more or less an academic setting, and now in America, how different are your last two residences as far as the Christian faith being accepted in public? Do you notice a big difference in America, that you can say America is more of an explicitly or muscularly, is muscularly a word? Yes, muscularly Christian country compared to England?
Yes, I would say, but not with much hope in a way. It's not that different in the end. That's what I want to say. I mean, in England, it's a non-issue, your faith is. I mean, I've met Anglican vicars who were atheists and who thought they're Anglican vicars, but they're atheists because they think religion is a good thing to have in society. So in England, it's a completely different atmosphere. It's all this intellectual thing. Maybe because I was in academia, maybe that was the difference. But I mean, your regular people are just indifferent as well because they're happy in a way. They don't need God, and that happens in a different way in America. Like I have, the rugged individualism. I think it works. Not well with Christianity in the end. You become too independent almost. Mm-hmm. You need God because you have your house, your car, your internet, and your cable TV. What else do you need? So it's different. I mean, definitely America, it still has that muscular feeling that England doesn't have anymore. But I think it's going the same way.
Definitely a tension, isn't there, between life in the body of Christ with its temporal head in Rome versus life, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. There is a kind of atomistic, individualistic spirit mm-hmm. in America that is not exactly harmonizable in the end with Christianity. You can obviously be a strong Christian and Catholic in America, but I keep having this conversation with conservatives of a certain bent who almost assume that Christ promised the Holy Spirit to be with America instead of the church. But America is going down. All empires crumble in the end.
Yes, and I think part of it, that individualism is one of the reasons, because if you're completely self-sufficient all by yourself, why would you ever need God? And, as you say, America is not the promised land. I mean, our promised land isn't on this earth. But I think it's kind of hard to talk about it without offending, because many people combine Christianity with the American Revolution and the foundation of America, mm-hmm. and it's kind of hard to separate them both. But I think America. I mean, it's not really hard to see that America is becoming less and less Christian every day.
Mm-hmm. I've met and interviewed a couple of Muslim converts, Daniel Ali, who is I think it's an Ascension Press book called 101 Questions on Islam, I think it is. Okay. Daniel Ali co-authored it with Robert Spencer. Also, one of the first people I interviewed on Catholic Answers Focus podcast is a guy called Mario Joseph, who was an imam in India, who was tortured by his family, actually, after he came to Christ through reading the Quran. Maybe you've heard that story. And I know that there are different competing forms of Islam. Are you in touch with other converts from the Islamic world? Is there like a growing sort of sub-community of people like-minded who have similar backgrounds in the Muslim world?
It's interesting. Yes, there is a group of people, but it's kind of if you're still living in your home country, like I feel much freer here, of course. It's kind of a matter of survival, and they don't identify themselves very often. So it's kind of hard to stay in contact. I still am in contact with my former friends from Turkey, but I'm not a part of this online big group because it's a matter of survival for them not to be identified very openly. But the more I talk to people, the more I realize that there are like foundation for ex-Muslims or and such. So it is definitely a bigger group. And I hear a lot of people are converting since the rise of ISIS because they start questioning this religion they've been taught for so long that ISIS claims to preach. And as I said, once you start critically thinking about Islam, it kind of goes downhill. And I hear a lot of Iran, because of that suppressive regime, again, has the same effect.
Yeah, Sohrab Ahmari is another one. I think I maybe connected you to, who now writes for commentary. Daria, I knew I'd have a problem, and the problem is there's too little time and too many stories off the main story here, but I want to thank you so much for carving out some time and telling the story. The book's called From Islam to Christ, One Woman's Path Through the Riddles of God. I'm allergic to the cliche page turner, but I found it after I got through the sadness of your initial days. It's very interesting read, and I hope people pick it up and give it to their friends, whether or not they're Muslim, whether or not they know anything about Turkey. It resonates. So I thank you for writing it, and I thank you for being with us today. I really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you very much for having me.
All right. We talked today about a lot of exotic places in rural England and all over exotic Turkey. I want to invite you to, I think, one of the most beautiful places on earth, and that is Assisi, Siena, Orvieto, and Rome in Italy. My wife and I and our spiritual director, Father David Genuine, are going to be there next year. It's April 3rd through 12th. We want you to come. If you sign up before November 3rd, you save $100 per person. If you pay by check, you save $130. So we're going to be there for Divine Mercy Sunday. We're going to go to all the major four basilicas. In Rome, we will be at St. Peter's Basilica Sunday morning, Divine Mercy Sunday with Pope Francis. We'll also have the general audience there in Rome with the Holy Father. And you're going to love it. If you've never been there, it's on a lot of people's bucket list. But here's how to register. patrickcoffin.media/Italy. That's patrickcoffin.media/Italy. Sign up, register. Seats are going fast, so if you want to commit and save money, before November 3rd, you save $100 per person. I look forward to having you there. Hope you're blessed, and hope you enjoyed the show today. The book, again, is called From Islam to Christ by Derya Little. Check out the show notes at patrickcoffin.media. This is The Patrick Coffin Show. Be a saint. What else is there?